Chapter 3. John was at the edge of panic when a giggle rose from the grass just a few yards ahead. Franny's freckled face popped up. She grinned at him. "Boo! Franny! Tricked you!" she said. "You didn't trick me," John lied. "I knew exactly where you were hiding." "How did you know?" Franny asked with a frown. "I could smell you," John said, wrinkling his nose. "You stink worse than Princess." Princess was their cow. Franny had picked her name. Actually, Franny smelled a little like apples and Ma's soap, but John needed to get even with her for scaring him. Franny's smile fell away. Her eyes started to tear up. "I do not stink," she said. "All right," John said. He hated to see Franny sad. "But don't do that again. I thought I lost you, Fran. You scared me." Franny burst out laughing. "That's a funny joke, Johnny," she said. "I know you're never scared." John's heart lifted a little. It was good having a little sister who thought he was brave. They rushed the last mile to the schoolhouse, which was about a quarter mile past Main Street. It was just a small, unpainted building, more like an overgrown dollhouse than a school. The school was barely big enough to fit all 15 students. The big and little kids squeezed together in the one room. Miss Rule had to figure out how to teach all of them. Luckily, John and Franny weren't late. The schoolhouse door was still closed. Kids were milling around outside, waiting for the bell. Franny went to join a jump rope game. John looked around, wishing he had someone to talk to. Back in Chicago, he had more friends than he could count. Before school, he and his pals would shoot marbles or bug the girls they liked. But here, there were only 3 boys his age: Rex, Peter, and Sven. They'd been friendly to John last fall, when he was brand new, but John always felt uneasy around them, afraid he would say something wrong and make a fool of himself. So he avoided them. Now they mostly ignored John, or maybe it was John who ignored them. He wasn't sure. But what did it matter? He'd missed his chance, and anyway, they probably knew John didn't belong here. He had nothing in common with those tough pioneer boys. Peter and Sven were standing nearby, rubbing the sleep from their eyes. But then Rex came sprinting toward them, and Peter and Sven perked right up. Rex wasn't funny like Peter, and he didn't have big muscles like Sven. He was quiet and serious. But Rex was their leader without a doubt. His family had been in Dakota longer than anyone. Rex skidded to a stop, huffing and puffing. "I found him," Rex exclaimed, wiping the sweat from his forehead. "Found who?" asked Peter. "King Rattler," Rex burst out. The boys gasped. John's ears pricked up. King Rattler was a huge rattlesnake that all the kids talked about. There were rattlesnakes everywhere in Dakota, stretching their golden brown bodies out on rocks, slithering through the tall grass, curling up in haylofts. Of all the sounds of the prairie, nothing chilled John's blood more than the shh, shh, shh of a rattler shaking its tail. Get away, it was saying. "Get away or I'll kill you." And King Rattler wasn't just any rattlesnake. He was the biggest and most vicious snake there was, a killer that had been terrorizing people for years. John had never seen him, but he'd heard the guys telling stories. Most snakes bit only if you stepped on them by accident. King Rattler would chase you down right to your door. He'd bite your horse and then leap up and sink his fangs into your neck. Or so the guys said. "I saw him at the creek," Rex went on, his voice rising. "I followed him. I found his den. I saw where he lives." "You found King Rattler's den?" Peter gasped. This was big news. Folks had been searching for years, John had heard. "There's a hole, a big nasty hole right under a rock," Rex said. I saw him go in. I saw it with my own eyes." John shuddered as he imagined the snake, the glistening fangs, the pink needle tongue, the deathly yellow eyes. "So now," Rex said, his eyes narrow and fierce, "we can kill King Rattler. We'll be famous," Peter hooted. Sven grinned. Rex looked over and saw that John was listening in. John flicked his eyes down. Too late, though. He'd been caught spying. Now Peter and Sven were looking at him too. John started to get up to move away, but Rex took a step toward him. "Want to come?" he asked. John looked up in surprise. "Come where?" he stammered. "With us," Rex said, "to kill King Rattler." John blinked. They wanted him to help kill a monster rattlesnake? That was the dumbest idea John had ever heard. He opened his mouth to say, "No, thanks." But the guys were looking at him hopefully, like they really did want him to come along. It had been so long since any kids had looked at him that way. Almost without thinking, John leaned forward. "Sure I would," he said. Chapter 4. 6 days later, Sunday, September 25th, 1887, around noon, John's house. Their morning chores were done. John, Franny, Ma, and Pa were back from church. Now they were sitting at the table for Ma's special Sunday meal, squirrel stew. Sundays were the best. John didn't have to go to school, and usually the whole family took the day off from working. John would play cards with Franny or go out hunting with Pa. Some days he'd spend a whole hour just sitting around and doing nothing like a millionaire. But today was the day he was meeting the guys at the creek to kill King Rattler. Of course, he hadn't told his parents the true plan for the afternoon. He'd said he was going fishing with his new friends. "Good stew," Pa said, as he sopped up the sauce with a hunk of fresh bread. It did smell delicious, but John's stomach was